You can love it or you can hate it, but it's hard to deny that DragonLance had an incredibly powerful effect upon the second half of Dungeons & Dragons' tenure when it was still at TSR. It has a huge legacy in shaping a great deal of what we think of as the fantasy legendaria that Dungeons & Dragons takes place in to this day. None of it has been particularly attractive to me, and there are some problematic elements to the settings. I'm looking at you, Kender. I'm looking at you, Gully Dwarves. I'm looking at you, genocidal gods. But notwithstanding all that, it's got an undeniable legacy, and Margaret Weis is one of the earliest and most pioneering women within the tabletop role-playing hobby at large. And Wizards of the Coast is, after all, alleging that they want to become more inclusive and create a platform for diverse voices to have their work appear on the page within the hobby. Well, notwithstanding that, from what we understand, a new trilogy of DragonLance novels has been canceled. And with that, we have to surmise that perhaps the setting itself is not going to be seeing the page anytime in this decade or perhaps for decades to come. Well, what happened there? Let's get into it in this video. So first of all, to disambiguate things, no pitchfork-wielding, torch-bearing mob at the behest of the Twitter command center came for DragonLance. Nay, in a Zoom meeting gathered around their computers sometime this last August, Margaret Weis Tracy Hickman, two editorial characters at Wizards of the Coast, one of whom who has a pretty sketchy reputation, along with Wizards of the Coast's in-house lawyers, and Margaret Weis and Tracy Hickman's editors at Penguin Random House, where their new book would be published, all heard from Wizards lawyers that they were going to be pulling out of the license agreement, or more properly, stonewalling it, no longer approving any future drafts of the novels that Margaret Weis and Tracy Hickman were working on. We should rewind to 2017 to explain that as part of the brand strategy for D&D, a new window was opening for the authors of older D&D properties to write novels within their settings. And Margaret Weis and Tracy Hickman, having heard that some other authors had received overtures and were writing some new novels for their work, got in touch with some editors at Wizards of the Coast. And they worked out a new agreement so that they could write a capstone swan song trilogy for their life's work. And it might be an opportunity to revitalize this campaign setting for D&D. After all, we haven't heard much about anything besides the Sword Coast of the Forgotten Realms. It seems like we forgot about all the other realms even on that place called Editorial. I'll be getting into some of my critique of where campaign settings went and where the legendaria of Dungeons & Dragons seem to have gone, which is to say, nowhere or into a closet, in the second half of this video. But it seemed in 2017 that maybe things were going through a pivot. And it was in that context that a lot of progress was made on these two new novels. An entire outline for the trilogy was shared with Wizards, shared with the publisher. Drafts of the first novel were completed and it was more or less done. And things were going pretty swimmingly well to the point that drafts of the second novel were written. And it was around this time in 2019, you won't see any of this in the legal brief, by the way, that a giant kerfuffle erupted around a Magic the Gathering novel, which was very carelessly edited and some really strangely overtly biphobic language made it into print. That it's just weird. The narrator's voice basically spoke to how having a woman-on-woman relationship, the character Chandra from the Magic property, after her breakup with her girlfriend, the narrator's voice weirdly discarded that relationship's validity and tried to invalidate that she was ever in love at all. It was some weird stuff, given that the setting was headed in a direction that was kind of more inclusive of LGBT voices. And Wizards of the Coast caught some serious flack for this from the Magic the Gathering community. So now let's fast forward into the future here, where we've looked at several other controversies unfold about Dungeons and Dragons. There's the Oriental Adventures controversy, which I don't know if I'm ever going to cover here on the channel. And there was the Orcs Are Evil controversy, which obviously I have covered in some respects here on the channel, and a multitude of other things going on, where the brand of Dungeons and Dragons is seen as having a lot of problematic stuff in its legacy stuff, in its past. And this is after a novel came out for Magic the Gathering, which obviously has some permissive or not very vigilant editing. We can surmise that it could be that their new editing regime kind of came into play. And we hear from the legal brief that is Margaret Weis and Tracy Hickman's lawsuit against Wizard that there was a good deal of sensitivity reading that was happening, and in fact going swimmingly well, up to the point of 70-page rewrites being approved to modulate different parts of the novels to work within the new situation that was going on. Interestingly, that new editorial team that I mentioned, which replaced the people that Margaret and Tracy had contacted originally, was replaced with a very controversial head of story, who is also now the editor approving stuff for these new Dragonlance novels. It's someone who has written some stuff which may or may not be very respectful of women, and is seen as really problematic, and they haven't spoken to the nature of that work. And Wizards of the Coast has kind of turned a blind eye to the controversy around their prior work that they had written and published before they arrived there. So it's weird that this person is being responsible for the approvals and the denials of these new novels. But notwithstanding that, it was under their oversight, we can surmise, or at least through them, that the corporate termination of this license agreement came to be. And with it, of course, we can surmise that, the fans of Dragonlance are going to really know that anything that Wizards of the Coast does with Dragonlance after this termination won't be Margaret and Tracy's work. It's kind of going to become unauthorized by the original authors. And so that kind of seals the book on Dragonlance being a setting for D&D in many respects. Because nobody's going to want this unofficial knockoff version, right? And it'll be hard to ignore that in the modern digital age that, this has nothing to do with the old authors. What could Wizards of the Coast possibly have been thinking? Well, I put it to you that it's probably just a matter of avoiding any future controversies by resurfacing the Dragonlance brand, which has a lot of problematic stuff in it, which is not really the responsibility of this particular novel. And it's certainly stuff which, smacks of the legacies of a lot of the stuff that has captivated the controversies of this year around D&D. The Kender are a fantasy species, which are characterized as a race. That's the semantics used in the Dragonlance setting, and they are uncontrollably kleptomaniac. They are a lot like halflings, except they look like children. And the nature of their kleptomania is, to my knowledge, as a bystander, not particularly explained. It's not like they have no concept of private property. It's not like it's a product of their biology where they were scavengers or the sort of, there's a certain sort of carnivore that is prone to taking other carnivores' kills. There are many reasons that could add nuance to why this was the case with the Kender. But every time that I've been at the table as a game master or as a player and somebody wants to play a Kender, it's just becomes an excuse to play a troll character. A character who trolls the rest of the party and creates a lot of kerfuffles with law enforcement, stealing stuff from shopkeepers, and generally making everybody have not a great time. at the table because it's what my character would do. This could be something which could be explored, redeemed, or rehabilitated by adding some nuance to it, as in the case of the Aarakocra race, who also have no concept of private property, but generally are not seen as very problematic and even very accepted within present-day D&D community. So there was an opportunity there to, with new works and with new Dragonlance, to maybe boost up some of these things that people might find problematic. Likewise, the Gully Dwarves, which are described in Dragonlance and in the fiction as barbaric, just kind of primitive. They've lost civilization, and there's just it may be because they're stupid. Like they're innately less smart than other dwarves. And likewise, tinker gnomes, I guess, if I understand correctly, are innately way smarter than the other races within. And the elves are super protective and paternalistic to the other races in Dragonlance. Which, some of those are known fantasy tropes and have been explored to varying degrees of effect without, being found particularly racist. But the totality of it, there's a lot of stuff going on there. Now, in the process of researching this video, I did hear some very interesting ways of rehabilitating the Gully Dwarves within the mythos of Dragonlance. One of them is to say that Gully Dwarves prefer to work with clay when they're making their works. Dwarves, after all, are often very preoccupied with making things of beauty out of the earth. So they're on the surface because clay gets wet, and it's limestone if it's underground. And they're also regarded as dirty by other dwarves because it's tough to work a potter's wheel without getting some mud on your hand. And likewise, they're creating works of art, it's pottery, rather than works of metal and the like. And this is regarded by other dwarves as something which is less refined, less technological, less nuanced, but is mostly a matter of prejudice and trash talking. It's an interesting way of enlivening what has otherwise been, again, anytime that I've been at the table as a dungeon master or as a player, and I've seen Gully Dwarves, it's been a pastiche of developmentally disabled people. That's what I've seen when they're played. And it's been a little cringy, actually, seeing that stuff happen. Because, someone chooses that particular species, that particular race, and then they play the character, and boy, it wasn't great. And then, I'm not a big reader of the Dragonlance novels, and I don't follow that canon very closely, but the other side of it is that the gods of good in Dragonlance apparently just nuked in a genocidal fashion an entire civilization because it was the right thing to do. And it's also my understanding that after having done that, the gods of good decided to take their ball and go home because people were upset about that. And so the gods became dead to the world. So this maybe, has some strange things to say about the nature of good within the alignment system, which people also are finding objectionable in D&D. And so what is the setting saying about the nature of good? Is this a parody of good gods? Is this a commentary on it? Or is this even possibly messaging that gods that engage in genocide can still be morally good? This could be a huge fight in Twitter that could go on for years if Dragonlance got really up in the headlines again. So I see why they might be wary of Dragonlance. But couldn't this be an opportunity to really explore these topics in a mature fashion, to have some live streams discussing it, to really be inclusive? And after all, this could include one of the most prominent women authors of the Dungeons & Dragons Legendaria speaking for the setting itself. I mean, this doesn't seem like an open and shut sort of thing. And we do know that the sensitivity rewrites were going pretty well. And we also possibly understand from the lawsuit that love potions were at play. And yeah, that's another side of it. In the legacy of old Dragonlance novels, some characters used love potions as a means to an end. And this goes into the whole non consensual realm of magic being used to change what people want, which is another part of D&D controversy. Whether love potions featured prominently or the legacy of those old actions of characters was revisited, we don't know. But we do know that the rewrites, including, if it's going to be 70 pages, that means what the character planned to do, what the character did, and the aftermath of the character's actions probably all had to be reworked within the plot. Those rewrites were approved. So I mentioned that the people who replaced the original editorial team that had brought Weis and Hickman on board to start writing a new novel, you got to wonder, what decisions were being made by them? Were these people playing it as cautiously as possible because of their prior reputation, because of how they might be seen if they had approved something which might feature some sexual violence? That's a great question. What we do know is that Dragonlance is done within Wizards of the Coast doors, and until Hasbro decides to let it go out of house again, as it did in the early 2000s. We do know that this speaks to how older campaign settings are probably not going to be developed a great deal with location books during the tenure of 5th edition. It does speak to how likelihood that other IPs within D&D are probably not going to see the light of day. And why is that? Well, I have a theory, which I was mentioned at the beginning of this video I might talk to you about. And that's that basically, I feel like campaign settings are not part of Wizards of the Coast brand strategy any longer for D&D. Because Jeremy Crawford has spoken to how he thinks of setting lore as intimidating and used as an instrument for gatekeeping. Because the books outside of the core 3 rule books, Player's Handbook, Monster Manual, DMG, what we see, rather than setting books for rule books, are Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes, Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, and so on. And these books are a lot like magazine digest articles, just stone soup of all kinds of different manner of things. New monsters, new essays on the different species, a new rules module for playing as a kobold. And it's all mashed together, and there's not really a coherent narrative, nor is there any setting stuff. The story of the Kingdom of Cormyr, for example. Why is that? Well, I believe that there's a market-driven reason for it. They want to sell hardbacks, and they want to see as much of their fan base as possible buying into it. They want a high market cap for each individual D&D release to pass on to the suits at Hasbro to show how strong the D&D brand is. Because if they were to publish something like, the Shining South softcover, which was one of my favorite releases from 3.x Forgotten Realms, they'd see that, this was only relevant to people who were already interested in Forgotten Realms, probably only relevant to dungeon masters who were interested in running their campaigns in that region, which means no players were going to buy this book. And so the size of the print run, the anticipated number of customers, gets lower and lower and lower as you make more specific setting content. And I think they're trying to avoid that as much as possible. Here's the real trouble in my mind with that, is that means that the legacy of all the old campaign setting work stands. Some of it was great work, incredibly imaginative. I love Ed Greenwood's Forgotten Realms, this way and that way. No matter how much the old school people will say that it is the Unicorn van and that the Conan van of Greyhawk is better. What do I care? It's the most anachronistic thing where you can just imagine your character sitting in a bookstore and drinking a coffee, reading a magazine printed on a printing press, and then walk outside and fight with a sword and spell. And it all fits together. Dungeons and Dragons and Forgotten Realms go together like peas and carrots. They were made for each other. And I think that's something to really be treasured. Notwithstanding that, if you look at the list of the authors of these elder settings that were very developed, Bruce Hurd, Mystara, Ed Greenwood, Forgotten Realms, Gary Gygax and Rob Kuntz, Greyhawk, Monty Cook, Planescape. You noticing a pattern here? Keith Baker, 2003, Eberron. Yeah, these are all white men. And Dragonlance is the lone exception. Is there really an opportunity for a new setting by a new author that works from a perspective that isn't Eurocentric? Would that be a great opportunity for a new setting to come on the market and do something fresh and new? Would this include diverse voices, which is something which so many people say is something that is important to them? Yeah, it would. And, for the rest of folks, let me put it to you that if a new setting was made, even if it were in the cause of diversity, this would mean that the gates were open again for campaign settings to start being a thing again. Any voices, regardless of what color or gender they may subscribe to. And with more out there, more creation, more world building, I think the hobby would be stronger for it, because not everybody is cut out to write tomes of 1,000 feats, giant spell books, or monster manuals, or subclasses. And Dungeon Masters Guild is thriving with all manner of things of that nature. But to really make a great campaign setting, you can't give up 50% of your revenue and pass it on to the landlord. It takes an incredible amount of work in terms of art and cartography and actual investment in the world building and playing campaigns in the world to see them play out. And with Dungeon Masters Guild, I don't think that's an adequate venue for settings to really flower. And we're not seeing them released as products. We're not seeing many Kickstarters for settings anymore these days. And I think that's because the leader of the pack is shy on campaign settings. And what could be more emblematic of how shy they are of this rich and amazing part of the heritage of the RPG hobby, some of which I try to lift up here on my channel with my videos about Harn, with my videos about Traveler. Well, what does it say? If that legacy is concluded, if it's too dangerous to talk about in public for the big money-making juggernaut at the center of the hobby? It's an interesting question. Now, we don't know everything about the context of how the licensing agreement was terminated. Margaret Weis isn't even talking about it on her Twitter, giving her side of the story, which is a bit weird, don't you think? You'd think my lawyer would probably tell me, no, you need to say this to the public and get the fans on your side. You'd think that that would be part of this. Maybe they're looking for a settlement, trying to keep things quiet. Well, that ship has sailed now, if you've watched this video. What do you think about campaign settings? Do you think that there's a future for them? Have you ever wanted to write one yourself and see it published? Do you think your stuff is good enough? Well, what venues do you think there are for setting authors to find that voice and get it out there into the RPG marketplace? Can we really equal the sort of amazing work that was done on settings when they were done in-house? No. These are questions that I have for you. Let me know about them in the comments below. For now, I'm the Complex Games Apologist. I am working on a new video, which is going to be about Traveler, and we're going to try and get back into some of the talky videos where I'm super focused and I have a script, and we're talking about the deep parts of the settings and lifting them up. So stay tuned this autumn for more of that sort of thing. Take care, folks.